Welcome back. So in our first video, we looked at the structure of the report, and the overwhelming point I was making is to keep it simple, keep it focused on the person that you're representing, and keep the information useful for the decision maker. I'm going to give you now 3 examples of 3 very different approaches to writing a report. And I do encourage you to think for yourself, what is the best way for me to capture the information I've found out? So I want you to imagine that you've met Mrs. McMurtry. She has lived at home. She doesn't have any support from the local authority. And until recently, I should say, she has been through a safeguarding process because the police found her wandering in the small hours of the morning, quite inappropriately dressed. She didn't have any shoes on, no coat. She was very vulnerable, frightened, cold. And when the police tried to bring her home, she was very confused, and it quickly became apparent that she has dementia, and there were concerns about her living by herself and whether she was safe to do so. You've been asked to get involved as an IMCA because she's been assessed as lacking capacity to make the decision about where to live, and the decision is, should she stay at home with support or should she go into a care home? When you meet her, she's adamant that she doesn't want to move. She doesn't want to leave the house. So we're going to look at a person-centred way of presenting this information to the decision maker. Now, this is, please take this information as examples rather than the finished article to illustrate the teaching points here. So section 1 might be a little bit longer, but you're essentially taking the background. So you want to set the scene. So here I've said that she lived in her own home since her husband passed 5 years ago, and there has been a safeguarding inquiry. She was found by the police, and the local authorities now considering whether it's safe for her to live or whether she should move into supported care. And they've identified a potential home for her. What we're doing the remainder of the report is we are making the point of what we found out, and then we'll evidence it. You'll notice as I read through this that at no point do I say, this is what I did. I'm straight into what the findings are of my work. What information have I gathered and why is it important? So the first thing I wanted to say in this report is that she wants to stay at home. That is her view. She's told me, I don't want to leave. I don't want to die in no care home. And she doesn't even want to have a conversation. So I've said that she's very robust in her determination to stay at home. I've put further evidence there that she's also said this to the social worker, and her neighbour also described her as fiercely independent. So you'll see in that first point 1, we've made the point and then we've evidenced it. We haven't described an appointment that I've had, because that's about me. We're keeping it laser focused on Mrs. McMurtry. So we say what we want to say and then evidence it. Second thing that's important that I found out is that she has a cat. And Dennis, the cat, is the most important relationship in her life. When I visited, I noticed there were photographs of the cat and there were paintings of cats. She loves cats. So here I'm now going to introduce the point that if she does go into a residential home, she must be able to bring Dennis with her, because if she didn't, that's going to have a huge impact on her well-being. And then the third point I'm going to make is about the context that there are concerns that she won't be able to live by herself. But I'm now going to see that from Mrs. McMurtry's point of view. And from her position, I'm asking the question, would it be better in her world for her to stay at home with support than to go into a care home? So in point number 3, I'm introducing that idea that actually she didn't seem against domiciliary care, and that might be an important part of the process, would be to consider not staying at home with no support or going into Redwood's care home, but actually staying at home with support and going into Redwood's care home. And which of those two are the least restrictive? In my summary, I'm then going to bring that together. I'm going to reiterate that she doesn't want to move out, and that all the steps should be taken to consider this. I might at this point reference the Mental Capacity Act requiring the least restrictive of her human rights to be at the forefront of that best interest decision. And I'm also going to talk about her rights and suggest that she has an assessment of her care and support needs, an OT assessment, domiciliary care could be considered. And I'm also going to think from her perspective, which friends, which neighbours might I like and who might be willing to support me to stay at home. So that's my starting point because that's from her perspective. And then the second part, I'm going to be thinking, if the decision is to stay at home, isn't to stay at home, thinking forward around, well, what does that care home need to consider? And then I'm also bringing in the idea of Care Act advocacy and a DOLS authorisation. And of course, if she goes into a care home, if they move into a care home, she's probably going to object. So I'm going to raise that as an early concern that she'd need to be supported to raise those objections. So I hope that gives you an idea of how to present some information that you found out from a person-centred perspective. The next example I'm going to give you is totally different. Next example is about a serious medical treatment. So meet Artie, and Artie's a young man and he has been experiencing, we think, pain because he keeps holding his jaw. His carers have noticed that he's reluctant to eat and chew on that side, but whenever they try and look into his mouth, he won't let them. Now, Artie does have a learning disability and he doesn't use words to communicate. He uses a very personalised communication method. So it's not straightforward to just find out, has he got pain? So the dentist is looking at a serious medical treatment decision and has asked an IMCA to get involved. So here in the background, I've just summarised that there's a potential for tooth infection, and I'm being very clear about what the decision is. Please make sure, particularly in serious medical treatment, that you're saying what is the decision. And in Artie's case, it's about general anaesthetic so that the dentist can investigate his teeth and possibly treat them there and then. So that could be an extraction or filling or some kind of work. So my findings. Now for Artie, I've not been able to take clear instruction. So I'm going to say that. Don't be frightened about saying that. If you can't take clear instruction, you haven't been able to find out views, say it. I think that's really important that we're clear. But I have found out some information via working with the staff and visiting Artie that is relevant. And because it's a serious medical treatment decision, I'm going to frame my findings in benefits and burdens. So what is the benefit of having the treatment, of having the general anaesthetic, and what are the burdens of having that general anaesthetic for the dental investigation? And that's what I'm going to put forward. So I'm going to say, from talking to carers and the dentist, these are the benefits. So we would establish if there is infection, it can be treated. The pain will be removed or reduced. He'd be able to eat better. And then it would prevent any worsening of that. But there are burdens. There's a general risk of any general anaesthetic. He might become very distressed. The staff said he might not tolerate the mask. And of course, there'll be swelling and moderate pain if any teeth are removed. And here, I'm going to really think about it from Artie's perspective. Now, in our story of Artie, we think will be okay if he has the right support with staff, which is something I'm going to go on to in the summary. But it could be that your person might be terrified of the dentist, and in which case I'm going to be really talking about that here. If you think the person has to be restrained, for instance, to have that treatment or investigation, that becomes quite a serious burden. So I'm going to be talking about that then. For Artie, however, carers believe he will tolerate, but there are some things that we need to think about. So some suggestions I'm putting forward is that we try and make the dentist known. So rather than being this big, anxious, hugely anticipatory event, actually, why don't we pop in, just have an ice cream? Because he likes ice cream. Why don't we just have an ice cream in the dentist waiting area? So he's not associating it with this high levels of anxiety and kind of anticipation. I also think that further work needs to be done, and I'm recommending the use of social stories or talking books to do that. Now notice, I'm not recommending anything about the decision. I'm not saying whether it should happen or shouldn't. I am putting forward points for consideration about how to make the decision have a better impact for the person I'm supporting. In Artie's case, I also think it should be considered. So I'm suggesting we consider the use of a pre-med. I'm not saying he should be offered one. And then I'm talking about avoiding unnecessary delays and also being supported by carers he really feels safe with, because that will reduce the anxiety. So I hope that gives you an idea of presenting information in a slightly different way with benefits and burdens. And then the last example, I'm going to introduce you to Liz. Liz has been living in a residential care home for a number of years. It's a small home and it's about to close, so she needs to move somewhere else. As her IMCA, I've gone to see her and I'm now writing a report about what I found. Now, because I couldn't take instruction from Liz, I'm going to use the watching brief, and I'm considering the question, how will the move to this proposed care home impact on her different domains? And that's how I'm going to structure my report. So introductory background, very clear, very straightforward. And that you don't need reams here because the decision maker knows this already. So what we're doing here is we're just summarising it to give the report context. And then I'm straight into the findings. I'm saying I haven't been able to take clear instruction. And actually, she's not wanted to speak to me. But I've still been able to talk to carers who know her well. And I've also been able to observe it. And because of that's how I've gathered this information. So you'll notice that these headers in bold are the watching brief domains. What I'm doing is I'm thinking, how will this care home impact on community presence? So I'm saying that the new care home is actually in the same community, so that shouldn't impact. However, what's important to Liz, because I'm doing it from her perspective, is that church is really, really important. And it's not just any church, it's her church. And that's the same way when you're working with people like, let's say they go to the bookies every Saturday afternoon to have a little bet on the football. Not that I would, but let's say that is important. It might be that it's any bookies because it's the betting experience that they enjoy. But I think for some people, it's less about the betting experience and more about sense of community and friendships. So it has to be that betting shop, if that makes sense. Has to be that church, has to be St. Mark's, because that's the community she's in. It's not just about a relationship with God, it's about her relationship with the parish. That makes sense. So that's what we're putting here. Choice and influence. We're thinking about how the new care home support her choice and influence. Well, one of the things I've found out is that she has quite a bit of independence and she likes preparing her own meals and drinks. If she's going into this larger care home, how will that be facilitated? Because in my experience, lots of larger care homes, meals are brought out and delivered. You have the tea lady or tea man with the trolley and it's served from an urn. How will Liz be supported to have choice and influence those day-to-day decisions about things like food? Relationships, really important domain. So I'm saying here that her most important relationships are with the church community, but she's also got a best friend, Sophia, who she currently lives with. And here I'm going to ask the question, if they can they be moved together? And I've checked that with Sophia. Because if that can happen, then that should happen and that relationship be supported. And then if it can't happen, how will Liz and Sophia be supported to maintain contact? Status and respect. I'm talking about things which are important to Liz and how she feels respect and status. For different people, that's going to be different things. That could be about employment. That could be about independence. But for Liz, I felt in my work with her that personal grooming was really important for respect and status, and that she really liked having her nails done and she liked to have a lipstick on and she liked to have the lipstick in her bag, what the carers said. So things like that I'm putting into the care plan. Now we might think, it doesn't matter, it's not human rights, but it does matter. It absolutely fundamentally matters. And what we want to do as an advocate is to make sure and fight for that new care home to be really meeting Liz's needs in ways that she wants. And then the last domain I wanted to talk about is her individuality and how social she is. And that actually moving to a larger care home, whilst we're not going to make assumptions that, she's suddenly going to have new friends, she might actually be happier with a bit more of a bustle or having more people around to sit with. Now, in the summary, I'm bringing forward the most pertinent things. So, church, she must be supported to attend St. Mark's, her friendship with Sophia, can they move together, and then personal grooming. I'm also going to suggest that she's supported to visit the care home. Now, in an ideal world, that would have happened before I read the report, and I could wait until I write my report until that's happened, and then I would include the findings and observations about how that went in the report. But sometimes I think they ask for your report before that can happen. If the person hasn't visited the care home, I think you need to be jumping up and down to make sure that happens. And then I'm talking about a review to be held shortly after to make sure that she's happy. Now, I can use legislation to support this, or I can just use quite informal language like in this report. I think that's up to you. So I hope that gives you 3 different examples of how to structure a report. And you'll notice throughout them, it's not about the advocacy, it's not about what I did, it's about what I found out. So we're keeping it simple. We're keeping it laser focused on the person and what we found out is important to them. And we're keeping it useful for that decision maker. And one last request, if I may, please make sure that you keep them person-centred. And by that, I mean be mindful of the language that we use. Don't use the word placement. You don't have a placement, you have a home. If we're talking about people's homes, call them home. I read a report a few months ago where it described the person as mobilising around the care placement. And I kind of shuddered. I thought, oh, mobilises. I mean, my child uses a wheelchair, as many of you know. I'd never describe him as mobilising. He just gets around. So be careful of service land speak dripping into your reports, because it can be very othering. So no mention of placements, no mention of client. It's people's homes. It's people. You use the person's name. Okay, good luck with your report writing. Look forward to seeing some when we meet. And take care.